Hey guys, welcome to J.T.Engineering, and in this episode we're going to be focusing on getting this locomotive all painted up and all the 3D printed detail parts installed. If you haven't seen part 1 of this series, part 1 is where we built this locomotive. We took the big pile of sheet metal that was in the bed of my truck, welded it together, and now it looks like a GP40. But in this video, we're going to go ahead and get everything all painted up and install all of our 3D printed detail parts. If you haven't seen part 1 of this video, go check that out and then come back here and see this video, and you can kind of get an idea of how you want to paint up your locomotive. If you want to build this locomotive, head over to JTEngineeringModels.com and you can download your files for a GP40 or for a GP38. But in this video, I really want to focus on the 3D printed detail parts and getting the paint exactly how you want it when you build the model in your garage. So why don't we go ahead and get started. In part 1 of this series, we welded the locomotive together using the supplied sheet metal parts from the online files. This is basically where we left off in the last video. All of the welding had been completed and she was just about ready for paint. But before we paint up the model, we need to do just a few things. First up, we need to drill and tap all of the 3mm holes for the 3D printed detail parts. These are holes that were laser cut for the 3D printed parts, but they were designed to be undersized and then cleared with the tap drill. There are a lot of printed parts in this locomotive that use tapped 3mm holes, so this takes quite a while. After like 3 hours of drilling and tapping holes, we have all of our holes tapped, with the exception of a couple that'll be easier to do when we bring the top of this off. So now at this point, I'm just going to kind of start getting everything ready for Bondo. I'm going to take the grinder wheel and just kind of knock off all the little curves from the tap and just hit all the little high spots that I find and just kind of get everything ready. So I'm going to go ahead and start grinding. Once that's done, we're going to separate the shell here from the frame. And then at that point, I think we're ready to clean the whole locomotive and get it ready for some Bondo. And then at some point, paint. I used a grinder with a sandpaper disc to knock off all the high spots and sharp edges. This model's going to be handled a lot, so it's important that all the sharp points are taken care of now prior to painting. I'd really hate to have somebody cut themselves while loading it or handling this locomotive, so knocking down all the high spots and sharp metal points is just a must. All right, we'll go ahead and remove the dynamic, which will be the last time we have to remove this before it goes on permanently. With all the sharp stuff taken care of, we could start disassembling the locomotive for Bondo and paint. First off was the dynamic section, and after that section was removed, we could start unbolting the body from the frame of the locomotive. With all of the body mounting hardware removed, we could remove the body and get it all cleaned up. To clean the body and prep the surface, we used pressurized air to blow off all the dust and wiped the entire body down using Simple Green to remove any oils and dirt from the building process. I did this on both the inside and the outside of the body because having a clean surface to work with when you're doing paint and body work is an absolute must if you want a nice finished product. With the body cleaned, we moved on to the frame and the floor section of the locomotive. We took the frame off the trucks, flipped it over, and I deburred the entire frame section with the grinder to remove any sharp edges. Once that was finished, we flipped the frame section back over, cleaned it up, and now we could start doing some Bondo work. Applying Bondo to your locomotive is not totally necessary, but if you're looking for a clean model, it's a step that I would highly recommend. Bondo fills all the remaining slots from assembly, and it's especially important on the dynamic section to make sure all of your seams make a nice clean transition with each other. It's hard to make sheet metal make complex geometries, so Bondo makes the transition between parts look a little more clean and a little closer to the prototype. I went around the entire locomotive and filled every part of the body that had gaps that shouldn't be there, and made sure to do a couple passes on the spots that needed them the most. Okay, we got all the filler work done. All the Bondo is sanded down. Everything is pretty smooth. I'm just going to come out here with the air hose and blow all the dust off, wipe it down with some Simple Green, and kind of scuff everything up that didn't get sanded with 220 so the primer sticks. But I think we're to the point where we can finally start painting. I don't know if you can see how well those lines all blended together with the Bondo. I'm pretty happy with that. Once all the Bondo had dried and I was happy with the body filling I had done, I took it outside and sanded all the Bondo down smooth, and then I sanded the entire body with 220 grit sandpaper to give the paint something to adhere to. I then wiped everything down with Simple Green one more time to make sure that the body was extra clean and that I wouldn't have any problems with the paint adhering to the body. Alright, well we finally have everything done to the point where we can start putting some primer down. Sorry if the video quality sucks. I'm spray painting this with the doors open so I don't get incapacitated and die. So I'm just going to use some Rust-Oleum primer. I scuffed up the surface. I'm just going to let it have it. With everything clean and ready for primer, I got to work priming all the surfaces. I started by priming the bottom of the locomotive frame and inside the body of the locomotive. I wanted to make sure I got 2 coats of primer down on all surfaces, so I went back and forth between the frame and the inside of the body when doing coats.
Once the primer on the bottom of the frame had dried enough, I flipped the frame over and started priming the top, and once again I worked back and forth between the body of the locomotive and the frame until I had 2 nice solid coats of primer on both sections of the locomotive. With the primer applied, I could start putting down some color.
All right, well, I think this primer is dried enough that we can start with our yellow accents. I'm doing the Rio Grande scheme, and there's a little bit of yellow that's on this. Just a couple little spots. The pilot is yellow, and then this side trim is yellow. So I'm just gonna do a ton of light coats with this yellow because it doesn't really cover that well. And then what we're gonna do is we'll tape all this off when we paint everything else black, going from light to dark. So that way, if there is some overspray with the yellow, the black will cover it right up.
When I apply paint to my projects, I always start with the light color first and work my way up through the darker colors. I started by applying the yellow paint on the outside of the frame of the locomotive, and then on the body where the lettering and stripes would go later on. This will make sense here in just a couple minutes, but I applied 3 coats of yellow and let it cure for about 4 or 5 days before moving on to the next step. It is crucial that the paint is fully cured prior to starting this next step, the lettering.
Are you gonna come in? You gonna come help? Well, it looks like we've got the yellow done. It's so close to being painted completely yellow that maybe we'll just go Union Pacific. The Rio Grande logo is going to be right here, and I wasn't exactly sure where all the letters were going to go, so I thought it would be solid to just paint it. I did get a couple runs up here on the cab. This yellow paint sprays really thin, and I'm also a terrible painter and a terrible bodywork. In fact, paint is my least favorite thing. Anyways, we're going to let this sit here for like 4 days so I know that it cures up really well, and then we're going to come in and put our stencil over the top and spray it black. And at that point, I think we're going to be done painting.
While the paint was drying, we could start cutting out our stencils. I designed these stencils in CAD and cut them out using my home vinyl cutter. I decided to make paint masks rather than decals for a few reasons. The biggest reason being color matching. There was no way I was going to be able to exactly match the color of a decal to the color of the spray paint I was using, and getting the decals to stick to surfaces with varying heights doesn't usually work well over time.
All right, so it's been about 4 days. We let the yellow completely cure, hopefully. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to apply our stencils. You can see here that these are the cab numbers, so they'll go on right here. And these little blue spots are all that's going to be left over, so that when we come and spray the black over the top of it, we won't be spraying over the yellow. And then once the black has dried, we'll come back and take the stencil off, and underneath will be yellow. So since these are relatively small decals compared to the big one here, I'm going to start with the nose. I'm going to do the cab numbers, and then I'll move on to the big decals. So let's get applying.
Applying the paint masks to the locomotive was pretty straightforward. I just lined them up on the surface where I thought they should go, and then did my best to get all the air bubbles out when applying. The most difficult one by far was the large lettering on the side of the locomotive, mostly because it needed to contour to all the doors, and they weren't perfect. A larger reason I decided to do it this way was because finding a vinyl material that the decal would have matched the yellow paint used everywhere else on the locomotive would be entirely impossible. Doing it this way ensures the lettering matches all the other colors on the locomotive. I'd most definitely recommend doing your locomotive this way, because then you know that the lettering is going to match the color that you use everywhere else.
All right. The moment we've been waiting for. I got the graphics on as good as I could. It was challenging to keep this straight the whole way, but it looks pretty good. So now we're just going to hit it with probably 3 or 4 coats, light coats of this black. We'll let it dry, and then we'll pull off our stencils, and we'll see the beautiful Rio Grande logo in yellow underneath. So let's get spraying.
With the masks applied, I started spraying the locomotive with black spray paint. I applied 3 coats of black paint and left it for a few days to cure. I also masked off the spots I wanted to remain yellow on the frame and spray painted everything else black. After a few days, we could come back and start removing all of our masks. You can see in these shots just how well this technique worked. I had crisp lines and all the lettering came out exactly how I was hoping it would. This paint job really did bring this locomotive to life. There were a few spots I did get some bleeding underneath the masking, so I just went around with some spray paint in a cup and touched up all the problem spots with a brush.
Well, I think we're pretty much done painting. I'm just going to put probably 3 coats of this Rust-Oleum clear on, let it cure for like 4 days, and then we're going to come back and we're going to put all the 3D printed parts on and finish up this locomotive.
I gave the entire locomotive 3 coats of clear paint. I did this just to add a little bit more protection, but I don't think it was totally necessary. With the body of the locomotive all painted up, we could move on to assembling some of our 3D printed parts while the paint dried.
All right, so now that our paint's kind of dried, we're going to start working on assembling some of these 3D printed parts. I'm just going to start from the nose back. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the nose headlight. The headlights are all assembled in the same way. You're going to need some of these 20 millimeter lenses. And the way this is going to work is you're going to slide them in through the back, and then they just press fit in like so. And then once they're press fit in, you're going to take a 1-watt LED. You can see I've already done this one. And the LEDs just pop in the lens here. Now when I turn on my power supply, you see that they light up pretty good. So that's a pretty easy way to do this. 20 millimeter lens, and then you just pop in your 1-watt LEDs. I am going to take just a little bit of glue, super glue, and just kind of put a couple little drops in here. I don't want to push these lenses all the way through, but I want them part of the way through. So just to kind of hold them in there, I'm going to get some super glue action on there. So I'll just do that on both of these. A little drop there, a little drop there. Push it in part of the way. That's adequate. And that's how you do your headlights, pretty easily. Next thing I'll move on to is going to be the class lights. Kind of same thing. You're just going to take a little bit of glue and put it around here on the inside. Take one of your 20 millimeter lenses and just kind of twist it in there and let it sit and dry. And then when that's finished, we can come in and put in our red, blue, green LED here so that the class lights actually function red, blue, and green. There's kind of a front view of what that's going to look like. That's the headlights. Now onto the horn. So you've got your base, horn 1, 2, and 3. For this, I'm just going to take a little dab of super glue right there on the bottom. The long one goes on the left side. Try and get it straight before the glue sets. That looks pretty good. The small one goes in the middle, just a drop of glue in there. Same deal. Try to get it as straight as you can. That looks pretty good. And then the medium sized is all the way on the right side. And that just snaps in there as well. And that's how you assemble your horns. Piece of cake. Let the glue set there. On to one of the more complicated, I guess, glued parts is going to be your radiator panels. So you can see that they come in pieces of 2. I did this because I wanted to make sure that everybody could print these, even if they had a little bit of a smaller printer. So first thing I'm going to do is there's some support material. Let's see if I can find one that has it. Down here in this little slot. Now what this slot is used for is it's actually going to be for inserting a screen if you want like a little bit more realistic detail. So I'm just going to take a pen or something. I'm just going to remove this support material. The slot was just wide enough that it actually needed it. So go ahead and pull that support material out. And then to glue these together, I'm just going to find a flat surface, put a little bit of super glue on there. I'm just going to go like this. Make sure they're lined up. And when that super glue sets up, I'll show you guys how we're going to put the window screen in the back of it. All right, so our radiator panel is dried. So now what we're going to need, if you decide to do this step, is just some window screen from the hardware store. And if you ever have any of these annoying spools of PLA or PETG, this is a really great time to use it, where you had to switch out a filament. So the way this is going to work is if you've ever rescreened a window, you know that the edges use that little rubber gasket type thing that pressed into place. This is the same thing, but instead we're going to be using a strip of filament. So just kind of lay your screen on here however you feel is nice. Take a piece of scrap filament, start in the corner, just like so, and you're just going to press it into place. Sometimes I design this fit to be really tight, so you're going to need some pliers or something to get it down in the slot there. You're just going to work your way all the way around the part, kind of trying to make your screen straight, I guess, if you're OCD like I am. You're just going to kind of go along, press it down into the slot, like so. When you get to the edge, if you have a little bit of excess, just take some scissors or a razor blade, snip it off, press it down, and continue all the way around the part. So you can see we've got our finished screen. There's a little bit of excess, and that PETG or PLA or whatever is pressed all the way in there. I did use some super glue in the corners to kind of hold it down. But once we've got our screen in, then we're just going to take a razor blade. We're just going to come in here. We're going to trim off all the excess. Now, if your PETG or whatever, PLA, if your filament is sticking up a little bit past the radiator, it's fine, because when we go to install it on the locomotive and we put all the screws in, that should act as a clamping force as well to keep all of this stuff nice and secure. You can also put some super glue in the slots if you want. You can see I'm just kind of tightening this up just a little bit. But that right there is pretty much how you put together your radiator panel. This is the thinnest mesh screen I could find at the hardware store. So if you don't really like the look of the wider mesh, just kind of do some shopping around and see if you can find some tighter mesh. I think it would look a little bit better. But that's how you do that. And you will apply the same technique to this smaller inlet. The slot is 3D printed around the base of that. So the radiators as well as the internal inlet. Moving on, these are the air tanks. Now, this is an older design. The new design has 3 pieces. It has 2 end pieces in a center, but the assembly is exactly the same. All these are just 2 tubes that need to be glued together. So I'm just going to bring some super glue in here around the edge, just like so. Take the other piece, put it in, twist it, set it off to the side for it to cure. That's how you put together your air tanks. Now, we do have one more thing, and I suppose I should have done this at the beginning, depending on how you want to look at moving forward to aft, but we're going to start with our number boards. So we have a few pieces to the number boards. This is our positive, number board positive, and this is the front number board, the number board negative, and then we have the light housing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by putting the negative in the positive, and all I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to take a little bit of super glue, just put a couple teeny little dabs here, and then this will snap in just like so. Push it all the way in. You can see that it's completely flush with the positive. Now you can see we have just these little teeny inserts here. So just going to put a dab of glue there, drop it in. And there's your front number board, positive and negative assembled. Now the way this is going to work is you have the front portion and then you have the backlight portion. So we'll put this in the locomotive, you'll see a little bit later. And then the backlight portion will come up over the back like so and kind of clamp it. And this little recess is for a 1-watt LED. So if you printed this the way that I did, where I did the black as 100% infill and the white was, I think I printed this at 15% or 10% infill, basically as low as you think you can get away with, then what will happen is the light will transmit through the white portion and not through the black. So you'll get a really nice lit number board. Now to assemble the rear number boards, it's exactly the same. You can see I've completed this one and the back portion is exactly the same. They're just a little bit smaller. So that's it for the number boards. And I think for the 3D printing portion, that's pretty much it. I do want to take a minute and just talk about how I'm lighting these. So for the light, we already pushed in our lenses. I just bought a big bag of these 20mm lenses for a different project, but they work really well. And then I'm using 1-watt, 3.5K lumens, or I guess temperature. And I chose to go with the little yellower color just because that's what the prototype looks like. So you can see they kind of come in these boards. You're just going to kind of snap it off there. And then I'll just show you on a lens that is not glued in how these apply. So you have the lens, you can see there's this little thing, and the front of the LED just clamps right in there. And that's pretty much it. If you need to replace it, you just pull the LED out rather than having to pull all of this apart, put in a new LED. Now for this one is the one that I've already have all assembled and put together. You can see here that I've wired this in series. The reason that I did that is because I don't need as large as a resistor value to drop it from the voltage, which will be a 12-volt supply. So I'll need a smaller resistor. The downside to wiring these in series is, let's say that the front headlight or one of the 2 headlights burns out, then the voltage is going to increase and burn out the other one as well. So if one of your lights goes out, you're going to have to replace both of them. But these are so cheap that it doesn't really matter to me. And being able to use a little smaller resistor or maybe even a voltage regulator that steps down the voltage to whatever you desire works out. So these draw in series about 160 milliamps or so. So I'm going to take it from what I assume is going to be around 12 volts from the decoder through a resistor to step down to the voltage that will not blow these LEDs up. I'll get a little bit more into detail with this later in the video when we actually put all the wiring and everything in, and maybe that'll even be a second video. But I think that this design is going to work very well because they'll be so easy to replace these without having to remove the entire headlight section. I think that's pretty much it for the 3D printed parts. We do need to put our windows together, but I think I'm going to do that a little bit later in this video. So why don't we go ahead, back out to the shop, and we'll start installing some of these. All right, so we got the masking off, and I gotta say, it looks pretty good. It's like an 8.5 out of 10, so a B, B plus maybe. I'm gonna go ahead and start installing my latches. These are the 3D printed latches. If you're using precision steel car latches, I don't really know how you'd attach those, but these 3D printed latches just get snapped in here like so. If I can get it lined up with the hole. It's pretty tight tolerance. They just snap in there like that. So I'm gonna go around and add all of these black latches. Just going to push them all in. Now you can see here that I've already done a couple tests on these latches that kind of are both black and yellow. So I'm just going to come in, I'll install my latch, and then place a piece of tape where the yellow should end. I'll tape off the black and I'll just give it a couple light coats of spray paint, let it dry in the sun. It's not entirely perfect. The tops and the sides didn't get a lot of yellow on it. So again, when I come around and touch up all these bleed spots in the paint, I'll just use a brush to fill those in with some yellow. So I'm just gonna kind of go around, put all my latches in. Once they're all in, we're gonna glue them in. I'm sure I'm gonna get some hate in the comments when we glue those in because it's a little bit of a odd process, but I think it'll work pretty nicely. All right, we've got all of our latches pressed in and ready to go. And to glue these in, I'm gonna use the trusty hot glue gun. I'm just gonna take a little dab of glue and just get it right there around the edges of that latch. Try to spread it around. You don't have to use hot glue. I just loved hot glue. It's the greatest thing ever made. And the reason I thought this would be a good idea to use for these 3D printed parts that could potentially need to be removed is because it's stable enough and strong enough to hold these parts in, but it's also easily removable. Like if you ever needed to change out one of these latches or like for example, I'm going to be doing this for the headlights and the number boards. So I thought that would be a good compromise because super glue is a little too permanent. You would take the paint with it, so on and so forth. Hot glue, as always, is amazing. I've still got a couple small things finishing up printing before we can put the trucks on the floor sheet. So I figured I would move up front and start working on gluing in all of our 3D printed lights and details. For this, I'm going to be using hot glue. Look, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this in the comments. These are prototype parts. I want to make sure I can remove them easily if they don't work. You can epoxy them in, you can use super glue, whatever you want to do, you can do that. But I'm going to use the trusty hot glue. I'm just going to start probably with the class lights. So they just slide in here like so. Nicely like that. I'm just going to kind of press them in there. Do the number boards here in a second. Do the nose light. Slide this in. Hold it tight. Press that in there. We're going to do the headlight. I'm actually going to glue the headlight in, and then I'm going to do the number boards. So I'll show you guys on the back side how I'm going to do this. All right, so we've got that pressed in there. I'm just going to put a little dab of hot glue on this to just hold it in place. Probably one right here on the bottom. Yeah. Just like that. Only one up here on the top. We give it a nice little... This is just supposed to be enough to just hold it. And I think that should be reasonable. The only thing that's kind of annoying about the hot glue is the little streamers or strings, whatever you want to call it. But that's cooled and it barely moves. So that's perfect for what I want to use it for. Again, if you want to epoxy, whatever, that's great. So now again, the number boards come apart. So I'm going to take the front, I'm going to just slide it in like so. And I'm just going to put a little bit of hot glue around the edge here. And I'm just going to press it on. Like so. That's pretty good. Do the same thing on the other side. Again, this isn't structural, you know, this is just needs to sit in there nicely. And these number boards are designed in such a way that they're pretty high fit tolerance. So the glue is just there to kind of hold everything in place. Perfect. Now I haven't glued in these lights yet because I didn't know how far apart they were, but now I can take a tape measure and we'll install our LEDs in there. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. Oh geez, this might be kind of difficult. Pretty good. I like it. And now the same thing on the back side. This glass light's already in. So we'll start by giving that just a kiss of hot glue. Freaking hot glue strings. Sure, might as well put this in. I put kind of a lot of hot glue in there, so I'm going to hold it until it cools. Pretty good. For the grand finale. The number boards. I think I'll do these one at a time now. Just like that. Boom. Lights done. Hot glue gun unplugged. All right, I think now we can go ahead and move on to our vents. I'm going to put the radiator vents in first. For this, these are 3mm by 6mm screws. All the holes have been tapped. These are our completed vents. So what I'm going to do is just kind of set this up here, and I'm going to put the corners in, and then I'll put the second one in, and then go around and put the rest of the screws in and snug everything up just to make sure that everything kind of fits right. Now, what I was saying earlier, if your screen is kind of coming up just a little bit, that's okay, because when you screw this down, it's going to apply pressure all along the sides here. That's why I tried to put a couple more screw holes in than I think are necessary. There's 8 on each of these. There's 2 on the ends, 2 on the middle, and 2 on the outside, you know, per panel. So 8 total. This one goes right here. Oh geez. So I've got just a couple of them holding it in. Damn it. As I was saying, now these are kind of set up in here. You can see I have modeled these little screw heads here, and I modeled them to match the size of these 3mm screw heads so that it's not obvious that there's screws. I mean, you can see the Allen heads a little bit when you get up close, but the size of the dimples match the size of this because I didn't want huge heads compared to the rivet size. So I'm going to completely put these in. I'm going to move up front. Same thing on the internal, what the hell is it? On that vent, whatever it's called. I'm brain farting. I'm tired, okay? So I'm just gonna put all the rest of these in.
Attaching these 3D printed parts is pretty easy. I just bought a bunch of 3mm screws in varying lengths on Amazon because it was way cheaper than buying it from the hardware store. I printed all of my prototype parts out of PLA. I'm aware that PLA can warp in the sun and isn't necessarily the best material for this application, but I wanted to test and see which parts can be printed out of PLA and which parts absolutely need to be printed in PETG. I'm designing this locomotive with beginners in mind, and PETG isn't really the most friendly material to print with for the beginner. More on this a little bit later.
I don't know why, but this is the part I have been most excited to install. I think it's just because it's like one of those really like kind of identifying characteristics of one of these locomotives. This brings me to a really good point though. If you already have a GP38 or a GP40 or anything with kind of similar detail, you can buy just the 3D printed parts on my website as well. So you could download the files, print them, lay them on the locomotive where you want, and then drill your pilot holes, tap them, and then you have a nice set of details for a locomotive that you might already have put together. So I'm just gonna go ahead and mount all these. I am pretty goddamn excited about how this is turning out. This was so much work, and it's so cool to see an idea and months of design and planning all come together and actually like fit. It's like probably one of the better things I've done. So I'll just continue to get these on, and I think we're pretty much done adding the 3D printed parts. We just need to flip over the floor sheet, put it in, and run the wiring. So we're getting really close. We are gonna start working on the floor sheet, the stuff that needs to go on 3D printed wise, as well as the speaker plate, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip over the floor sheet and actually put it on the trucks and then install everything. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with the speaker plate here. We'll just start from I guess it doesn't really matter, but we've got these speaker spacers. The smaller ones are for the JVC speakers. And the way this is going to work is I'm just going to set these on here, just like so. And then we'll bolt them up and through the plate, like so. Throw a washer on there for good measure. I'm using lock nuts for this because as this goes down the track and rattles, I don't want to have to pull these speakers off and drop the plate off the bottom of the locomotive to fix this. I've also done an adequate job of soldering on these speaker wires. The reason I soldered them instead of using the little clips that they provide is because I didn't want to accidentally pull the connections off from up inside and then once again have to drop the speaker plate just to fix the speakers. So everything I'm doing here is just so that I hopefully don't have to take this off again. Not that it would be that difficult, but it just saves me the extra work later. So we're just gonna go all the way down. We're gonna have two 6.5-inch JVC speakers, one 6-inch sub, and then we'll put it in the locomotive and install some of the 3D printed parts on the floor sheet. We're gonna install our speaker plate now. So the first thing to kind of mention is all these wires need to get passed through the base here. So if you were wondering what this weird hole in the bottom of the floor sheet is, that is for our speakers. So I'm just going to lift this up and kind of pass these through here enough that I can reach them on the other side, like so. Thread everything in here, and it drops in here just like so. That looks pretty good. So now I'll come in, put our bolts in, or our 3mm screws. I'm going to put some Loctite on them. I know you guys are going to give me some shit in the comments for this because this is not the right Loctite for this, but I don't know what I did with my red Loctite. So I'm just doing what I can with what I have. These screws are a little bit of a pain in the ass to get in, but I will prevail. All right, so now before we flip it over, we got one more thing I'd like to do, and I want to put on the air tank and the air tank mounts. You can see under here, there's two little screw holes here and two little holes here that we tapped, and that is where the air tank is going to mount. I've already done this side. You can see we've also got these little air tank hoses that just kind of sit in there for looks, and when it's sitting on the ground, you'll never know that they don't go anywhere. So I'll show you guys how to mount that. We'll flip it over and put it on the trucks for the last time. Oh, and by the way, these speakers look mean. So we've got our air tank mounts, right? We have 4 of these total, 2 for each side. You can see there's 2 holes in there, so you can use both holes. I don't know if that's really necessary, so on the other side I just used one, and I think it's good. And again, putting the wrong kind of Loctite on here. And I'm just going to slide this mount forward like so. You can do whatever you want, but these holes are not the easiest to get screws into because they're way underneath the fuel tank, and I am struggling. I think only one on each one is completely necessary simply because once the air tank gets glued in, they're not going to want to rotate. So I'll get this snug down, we'll get the other one in, we'll glue the air tank on. All right, we've got our mounts on, so now we're just going to glue them on. I'm just using super glue. You can use whatever you want. I'm not your dad. I'm just going to put a healthy dose of super glue on there, just like so. And then I'm just going to put it on about where I think it should go, which according to my drawings is right about, give a little twist. Spread that super glue around. I'm just going to hold it here until it completely, not cures, but dries enough that I can let go of it. All right, this is nice and dry. So now we'll go ahead and install our air tank hose. Again, you don't have to do any of this, but this is what I'm doing. There is a specific way this goes in. You can see that one part of the S is a little longer, so that's the end that will go in there. I'm just going to dab a little glue on there, slide it in, twist it to where I like it, just like that. We'll do the same thing on the end over there. Okay, these are the last 3D printed parts. These are just TPU inserts here that just slide in this gap. And these are just to keep the powered truck wires from chafing when they turn corners, and that is to try to not take this apart as much as possible. So that slots in between the metal here.
With all the 3D printed detail parts installed on the frame, we could now install the powered trucks and flip the entire frame over and set it on the rails. With the frame right side up, we could finally install the body for the last time. I aligned all the tabs and slots and screwed the body into the frame. With the locomotive finally all assembled, I could start installing the batteries in the control system. For the control system, I decided to use something a little bit different, the Bluenami 4408 DCC decoder from Soundtrax. This decoder has Bluetooth connectivity, which means I can run this locomotive, sound, light, and motor functions all from the Bluenami app on my phone, just like you would be able to with any other DCC control system used in smaller scales. While it wasn't necessarily difficult to get the system to work properly, it was a whole lot of messing around, and I plan on making an entire video in this series dedicated on how I built my control system. Using this decoder and wiring my own control system, I was able to save at least $1,500 compared to buying something already made similar to the 4QD. In testing, I found it worked extremely well. I had zero issues with this controller to date other than the operator error. If you want more information on how I did this, hit subscribe and watch for my dedicated control system video in the series. But for now, let's listen to the startup and sound that this locomotive has to offer using the DCC 4408 Bluenami decoder from Soundtrax.
Moving on to the radiator fans, we've got the bottom part of the fan and the top part. You can see my upper radiator plate is laying on the ground right now. So to do this, I'm just going to go ahead and take my cover here, set it over the hole, drop this in. I'm just going to take a little bit of hot glue. I'm just going to kind of glue these two pieces together. This way you can take it back out if you need to. If you break one of your fans or something, they're just sandwiched together like that. There's also screw holes in the side. There's two little teeny screw holes you can use if you like. I think hot glue is just easier. These are just for looks. They don't have any structural purpose. So I'll get the other one on and then we'll mount it to the locomotive. All right, set it on here, screw it down, just like that. Now there's two holes in the back that are a little bit larger. These are for 1032 eye bolts because the EMDs had the eye bolts here and then also up front. So I'll put the eye bolts in these two back corners and the rest of them are 3 by 6 millimeters. Now we can go ahead and set the dynamic on top. Slide it over the top there, line up your holes. Go ahead and screw that in, and I'll also add the 3D printed detail parts on the top. Click. All right, to finish up the dynamic, we've got this dynamic side vent thingy. I don't know. I have no idea what any of this shit's called. I'm just looking at pictures and modeling. But anyways, there are 6 screws in the dynamic side, and you just go on and screw them all in. You can see that just get screwed onto there. It's just staying with one, but that's what it looks like. All right, you guys, I screwed up on this part. The bell mount, you can see there's 2 holes that only pass through part of it. This is meant when the body is off, that you can screw into it and then it'll be hidden by this aft walkway. I was redesigning this part and forgot about it before I put the body on, but it's no big deal. So if you forget, we're just gonna glue it on, but this is designed where you would put it up under the floor sheet like this and then screw it down. But anyways, that doesn't really matter. To put these together, you've got your bell and your bell mount. It's just as simple as putting a little dab of glue in there, just like so. Give it a nice little dabaroo, and I'm gonna put it up in there and let it sit like that. And since I didn't screw it in, I'm just gonna glue it where I feel like it should go, which is right there. Now, for the thing that I think is just going to tie the room together, let's go ahead and put our plow on, shall we? My coupler brings all the cars to the yard, and I'm like, I'm better than yours, damn right. So I just wanted to show what these removable door latches look like. You can see, if my camera would focus, that there's a little bit of a groove down there in the bottom. So the way this works is you just set it in here, and then that slot, if I get it in, there we go. You just press it down a little bit, magnet it on, just like that. You want to take it off, just pull it off. Your magnets, sometimes it's a little bit hard, and then lift it up, just like that. Pretty slick. If you want removable doors and you don't want to go through the hassle of putting hinges in, that's kind of a cool way to do it. All right, we're getting close to being done with this locomotive. We just need to put on our handrails, and then I think that's it for all the detail parts and the painting. You can see that I've already put the handrails down this side. To show you guys how to put the handrails on, we're going to start up front. So to start here on the front, we're going to need our long stanchion. There's 3 different kinds of stanchions. There's a long stanchion, there's a short stanchion, and a single hole stanchion. The long stanchions, there's only 2 of them, and they're designed to go up here on the front of the locomotive. The short stanchions are the ones that go all the way down the rear sides, and the single hole stanchions are all the ones that go on the pilot, and you'll see that here just a moment. So I'm just going to take my long stanchion here. I'm just going to get my 3mm screw, and I'm going to go ahead and screw it into the side trim piece here that we've already drilled and tapped. There's 1 screw, there should be 2 of them. The reason I'm putting this on here now is that we're going to need this to be able to kind of see where we're going to bend. What I've done is I've grabbed a piece of 3/16 rod, and you can see that I've made a 90-degree bend here, and that's going to go into the cab right here. These holes are undersized. They're designed so that you can drill whatever hole and whatever railing size you want. I'm using 3/16, so I've got my 3/16 drill bit here. Go ahead and clear this hole. Just like so. Looks bueno. I'll go ahead and take my rail here, just kind of work it in there. Doesn't need to be perfect right now because we're just in the bend and test fit phase. Use a mallet if you need to, that looks pretty good. Now, on this locomotive, it's got a little bend right about here. It comes down, meets the stanchion, and then it goes down and mounts into the steps here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take a marker and I'm gonna mark where I want my bend to be. We'll bend it, and then when the bend is kind of down here like this, we can use another piece of rod to mark our other bend so that we know to line up, and then so on and so forth. So we'll have them grab my marker. That's where I want my bend to start. And we'll take this back out of the engine and we'll go over to the vise and we'll bend it. All right, over to the vise. I'm gonna go ahead and clamp this in here, and my bend line is right on the edge of the jaws here. So I'm just gonna line that up. And then I'll go ahead and make a bend. Doesn't have to be perfect, just close enough that you kind of get it right where you want it. And then I'm gonna go back over to the locomotive and reference the top of that stanchion. So back over to the locomotive, there's gonna be kind of a lot of back and forth, but you can see that I've got just a scrap piece of 3/16 rod here held in the stanchion. This looks pretty level compared to the other side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna make a mark right about there, and then we'll go back to the vise and we'll bend it so that it comes out like so. All right, back from the vise, I'll go ahead and remove that piece of scrap here. Go ahead and throw this in there, see how we did. If I slide my stanchion holder over, slide it in, take a look, that looks pretty good. So now I'm gonna mark the bend that I want to go down here. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of just maybe take a piece of rod here and hold it about where I want it to be. Make a mark, and then we'll do a 90-degree down. See how we're looking here. Slide that on here. Move my little stanchion thingy down. Slap it in the top there. Maybe need a little bit more of a bend. You can kind of bend it while it's on here as well. That should work. I wish it maybe was a little bit closer, but I think that'll be fine. So now I will mark the bottom here. There's a hole that goes right here, so I'll just make a mark just above it so that I kind of get a little bit of room there for the radius of the bend. Our piece is bent. See how we did? Go ahead and slide this in this side down here if I can get it in. Pretty good. Slide that in there. That's pretty close. I might be a little bit high, but the good news about these stanchions is there's 2 holes, and if you end up making your bend just a little bit high like I did, you can go ahead and take it out and just lower it down a hole. You're only gonna have 1 screw holding it in, but I'm kind of to the point of this build where I don't give a fuck. So I'm just gonna go ahead and see how this fits right there. And that's how you put your stanchion in. Mine's not perfect, not great at bending. I left this long because I wanted to make sure that if I needed to rebend it, I still had some material. So what I'll do is I'll mark it and cut it off, and then we'll be done with that. So the front stanchions are a little easier, the ones just in front of the pilot, because we've got this profile that we want to follow. So I'm just gonna set this on here, roughly centered. I'm gonna mark the corner here. I'm gonna mark the corner here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of give it a little tilt there. Mark the corner there. Same thing on this side. The fit is a little bit harder here, but it should be just fine. Mark it there. And now we know where we need to go down and out. Back from yet another trip to the vise. And that looks like it's pretty good, actually. I'm happy with that. So now I'll put the stanchions on, get it mounted, and then we'll run it all the way down to the holes here, which I don't expect to be too big of an issue. All right, now I'm gonna mark where I want the bend to start for it to start down. Trying to make it as equal as possible. It'll come down like so, and then it'll go straight down about level with the platform here. And then we've also got our front mounting holes for it here. So I'm hoping that all this stuff works out right. All right, just got the bends to make for it to go into the mounting hole. Just gonna make a mark just a hair above the hole, maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch to account for the radius of the bend. Here we go. And let's hope that it fits. Over to the vise once again. The moment of truth. Will it fit? That is the question.
Bending the railings is a bit of a time-consuming job. Making sure all the bends line up can be a little bit tricky, but I made sure to buy a little bit of extra 3/16 round bar just in case I made any mistakes and needed to rebend the railings. With half of the locomotive done, I was able to move over to the other side. It's all rinse and repeat from here. Using a marker to mark your bends and making sure the rails line up with the stanchion tops is a great way to get this portion of the project done. I chose not to paint mine, 1 because I'm lazy, and 2 because I kind of like the way that it looked with just the bare steel railings. With that being said, this is a good time to talk about how to attach our stanchion top.
All right, so we're finishing up the stanchion here. This is our last one, and I wanted to show you guys this really quick about the stanchion top. So we've got these 2 mounting holes down here, which are threaded already, and the stanchion top has a little hole in it, and it's designed so that it passes all the way through. So you'll just take your 3mm screw. There's no tapping or anything required. You just kind of press it through. It can be a little bit difficult sometimes, but it does work. And the way that this works out is the threads will grab the back of the stanchion top. Like I said, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get it started, especially if your bending sucks like mine does. Oh, jeez. Sometimes if you get one that's not lining up real great, you can just take an 1/8 inch drill bit, just clear the hole just ever so slightly. Now it should go right in. There it goes. I'm holding the back end of the stanchion top here to make sure that the threads engage with it, and they have. And it's just enough that it keeps it from coming off. So that's how you mount your stanchion top to the stanchion itself. Is this a direct replacement for steel stanchions? Absolutely not. If this was operated in a club, I would say this was a bad idea because people don't treat their equipment the same as they treat somebody else's, and they would definitely get broken. But if you're just using this locomotive for a home railroad and you're careful with your stuff, I think the 3D printed stanchions will work great. And if you do break one, it's only 3 screws. You just pop it out, the stanchion top stays on the railing here, slide a new one in, and you're on your way. Let's go ahead and get the windows glued in, and then I can say we are finally done with this GP40 build. All right, so let's talk about installing and assembling our windows here. I've got my side cab window frame here, and this right here is just 2-part epoxy. In your files, you'll find some acrylic files. These are to cut the windows out of acrylic plastic. I used polycarbonate. These are only with the 3D printed detail parts. But to do this, we're just gonna drop the acrylic right there in the back of the window frame. This is the front, so it gets glued in from the back. And then I'm just gonna take just a couple little teeny dabs of epoxy. I'm just gonna kind of epoxy the corners in a way that you won't really be able to see it when it's installed in the engine. Now, if you're using super glue, I would probably not recommend that. The reason being, super glue can leave like a white, weird chemical reaction when it glues to the polycarbonate or the plexiglass, whichever you decide to use. So that's why I'm using 5-minute epoxy here, is just to keep that haze from appearing on my glass. So I'm just ever so slightly epoxying those in. Maybe I'll do one here. Not the greatest, not the worst, but it works. I'll set that aside. You can see here we've got, these are our 2 front window frames with the polycarbonate in there. And we've also got the frames for our doors. So these are done the exact same way. So I'm gonna finish just epoxying the plexiglass in, and then we'll install it in the locomotive. All right, our 5-minute epoxied windows have set. So now I wanna add just a little detail that you can do if you wanna have a little bit more realism. In your 3D print files, you'll see this. This is the wiper blade, if you feel like doing a wiper. And on these front windows, you can see there's 2 little holes. There was designed to be a post printed into the wiper, but it's too small and it broke off. So all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take a little dab of super glue, slam it on there. I'm gonna line up my wiper, just so it hangs out just like that. I'm gonna let that dry. Do the same thing on the other one. A little bit of glue. Add the wiper. We'll go ahead and let that dry, and then we'll glue them in. The way that I'm doing this should come as absolutely no surprise to anybody. You guessed it, hot glue. All right, so here we have our 3D printed manual brake assembly that goes right here in the slot in nose 1. And to glue this in, I'm just gonna take a little bit of super glue and just run it just along the edge there, just enough that it'll hold it. And then this gets mounted from the inside, so I have to reach around in here and slide it just up in there like so. And I'll just hold it here while that super glue sets for a minute, and she'll be glued in. Well guys, that's it. We are to the end of this build, and I gotta say, it looks awesome. I spent 10 months designing this thing, another 8 months building, prototyping, fixing errors, finding errors, and making it all work so that you can go to JT.EngineeringModels.com, download your files, and build this GP40 or GP38 in your garage. I gotta say, it was really fun to build. It is a big project, but at the end, I am very happy with the result. So once again, thank you for watching. If you don't want to build a locomotive, I do have some other easier projects. I've got a flat car that's perfect for beginners on my website, and I also have a Rio Grande wide vision caboose that you can find on this channel as well. Anyways, I think you guys are tired of me talking. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more of this. I've got tons of other stuff coming out, trains, planes, automobiles, all of that. Until next time, thanks again for watching, and stay classy, San Diego.